This is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Hey, good afternoon. It's Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Great to have you with us today. Hopefully you're in warmer climates. Just got a phone call yesterday from my buddy who's in the Bahamas. It was -8 this morning, and it's 0 right now. And I know most of this global warming is really hitting the United States, where it's like I hate to laugh about it, but I guess they call it climate change now. It's amazing. No matter what happens, there's people out there just talking about global warming, and in the last year, it's been the coldest I've ever seen it here in Colorado. But anyway, welcome to the show. We're going to do a show today. Usually we take a topic, as you know, whether it's talking about Common Core, which a lot of people have called me about. We're going to have to play that as Best of Laffey show. The one about Common Core. Even stuff I posted about Common Core. Fixing America, Laffey Minutes about Common Core. And even recently what's happened here in the local area in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live, that's made the national news, where parents are out protesting about having America Day, and they just haven't got to the point where I have, where I just don't have my kids in the public schools. I'm just not going to deal with the local union rep who reports to the state union rep who reports to the national union rep and doesn't do anything to educate my children. So I just do it myself with my wife. But anyway, today it's about the Olympics. And I thought we'd just start off. Everybody has these great memories of the Olympics. You know, when you're a kid, my first real Olympics were 1972. And, that was in Munich. I mean, it was a terrible situation. We're going to talk about Munich and the Israeli athletes who were tortured and murdered. And to this very day, no one even acknowledges it in the Olympic Committee. The anti-Semite movement in the Olympic Committee, the corruption in the Olympic Committee from whether it was, I guess, fascist Avery Brundage or the next guy who took over after him, Samaranch, who was a fascist himself, and learned how to promote these Olympics into the corrupt games that they really have. And they've been corrupt forever. But that's not the memory that we have, right? I mean, when you're a kid, I don't know how old you have to be maybe not to have this memory. You've got to be pretty darn old. But when you're a kid, I'm sure people out there listening are like, oh, yeah, I remember so-and-so. I mean, we can go back to me. I was a big swimmer in Little Old Rhode Island. So having been the state champ in a number of races and so forth, in the age group swimming, and second in New England's and so forth. But, for me, it was all about Mark Spitz. So it's 1972, and they're coming out of Munich, and everything back then's on tape delay. So the big thing was, at the age of 10, was that for me to get my parents to let me stay up and watch Mark Spitz swim for the Olympic gold medals, which he won 7, which was unheard of. Now, he had previously in 1968, which I probably didn't watch. I think it must have been in Montreal. I don't know where 68 was. But, he only won 2 gold medals. So he came back after going to Indiana University and talk about a guy who was like a hero figure for swimmers, or probably every athlete. And he won every event, every time in a gold medal. And he came to the last event, and it was the 100-meter, I guess. And, he I think he said something like, if I win 6 gold medals, I'm a hero. And if I lose the 7th, get the silver or whatever, I'm a GOAT. He really didn't want to swim it, but he did, of course, and he won in world record by half a stroke, I think over another American. But that was like, wow, And then you talk about, you get to be older, and I'm 18, 1980 Winter Olympics, and we're playing a high school basketball game. And Tom Mooney, who's since passed away, he became a colonel, one of my great friends growing up, he comes out off the bench or something. Even though he was a starter, somehow he came off the bench and said, laughing to the team, America beat the Russians in the hockey. And so we're all pumped up. We're playing a high school basketball game. I'm no longer a swimmer. I'm a, so-so basketball player, I guess, but the captain of the team. But no one's going to play Division I basketball. And you just, wow, this is great. You can't believe this has happened. This is wonderful. And so you have these great memories, and we can go through the great memories. But as you get older, you're not supposed to be a kid anymore, right? You're supposed to shed your kid's clothing. And for me, the professionalization of the sports where the pro athletes, like the basketball players, the dream team started showing up. To me, that was just disgusting. We really didn't need. I mean, I know what happened after the basketball. I watched the replay. I don't know if I watched it live. I must have been too young. But I guess it was also the '72 Olympics. Maybe it was the '76 Olympics when we got robbed by the Russians, and they just violated every law, every rule. But that happened a lot. Even when you were a kid watching it, you knew people were cheating. They talked about this stuff, the cheating, the internal corruption, because countries use the Olympics to promote their way of life, even if their way of life is communist China and, I don't know what you call Russia, oligarch dictatorship Russia today, or what it was back then. It was fairly obvious, wasn't it? Even as, I don't know, was I 12? Was I 16? It was fairly obvious, I remember it well, that the East German women swimmers either weren't women or they were massively cheating. They weren't what we knew to be women. And so, but when they ask them about it, of course not. And they still got to swim and they got to keep the medals. And years later, it's like Lance Armstrong in another world where, like, really? Of course he's cheating. Barry Bonds, yeah. Like, his head is 10 times bigger. I mean, I'm joking, but significantly bigger than it was when he was a kid, which one of my doctor friends said there's a disease you can get that can make your head grow larger, but that's about it. So the cheating is not something we're really going to talk about today, but you overlook it because, and we do overlook it today, because what do we love? From ancient Greek times to today, we love to see great athletics where the best in the world go at it, and things that, we appreciate, I think, things that we can't do, right? Should we have more emphasis on stuff that we can't do, like great physics people and people who solve some of the great math problems where we should, but we don't. We love to watch the great runners. I mean, there's nothing greater than, I love the high jump, by the way. What's better than the high jump? Dwight Stones, redheaded guy, does the announcing now. I remember things like was it called the Fosbury Flop? You remember, I don't remember when it happened, but I remember that being the way to do it, go over backwards. You love seeing this stuff. But now it's always this taint about, are they really cheating? And you feel bad for the people who really aren't cheating. And, of course, anytime you see a runner, one of these long-distance runners, you think, they must have been doping, even to this very day. But we still watch it, hoping that they're not cheating. But the Olympics themselves, if we go all the way back, you can go back to when they reintroduced them again, back in the late 1800s. But we really go back to what was 1936. And, I thought I just stopped playing, by the way. I don't have them. Boss made them up. But it's great to watch. We have all these clips of the Olympics being introduced in a new city. And I thought along the show, we just play them because the excitement of a city to get the Olympics is wonderful. I know Denver here tries to get the Olympics. They haven't not been successful. They're going to try again. Then you have to ask yourself, why? I mean, if there's any solution to the Olympics, well, there's probably a lot of solutions to the Olympics. But one would be, why do we keep changing the venue? Why does it still seem like the statist countries get a bigger leg up and get more times where they can have the Olympics to showcase what they want to showcase to the world, not to America generally. But today in Russia, in Sochi, Russia, which is a total disaster, right? And we'll talk about it. I mean, it's $50 billion. It's in a place where, when I looked at the map, when they first announced it, I'm like, wait a second, it seems like it's kind of warm down there near the Black Sea. How are they having the Olympics there? $50 billion, of which at least a third, people think, is sitting basically in Swiss bank accounts with the childhood friends of Putin or the oligarchs of Russia who are somehow getting all the money. The cost overruns are brutal, and Putin is going to try to use the games as a way of showing what a great country he has. That is going to totally backfire on him, it looks like, as the initial reports out of Russia and Sochi are so terrible that every reporter there's just, in fact, we can do page after page of what they're tweeting, just reporters. I don't know if you've seen, but they got sidewalks where no one put the caps, the sewer caps on, the manhole covers, whatever you want to call them. So you can see physically walking down the sidewalk where the holes are like as a person could just walk and just drop right down. There's no caps on them. So anyway, let's play a couple of these clips because I won't get through all 20. Here's Montreal 76. Here's the announcement.
The 70 members of the International Olympic Committee have just finished balloting, and I will now announce the result, which I do not know. The results of the voting, ladies and gentlemen, for Montreal, 41 votes, Moscow, 28 votes, and 1 blank vote.
All right, there's Montreal. Here's Calgary, 88.
National olympique réunie en séance plénière à Baden-Baden a décidé que l'honneur de célébrer le Jeux aux Olympiques d'hiver de 1988 reviendra à la ville de Calgary.
Calgary. C'est la première fois que le Canada et son...
And here's Seoul,
Durant
88.
sa 84 session, le Comité international olympique, réuni en séance plénière à Baden-Baden, a décidé que l'honneur de célébrer le jeu de la 16e Olympiade en 1988 reviendra à la ville de Séoul.
So these announcements, by the way, are I just spent about 8 hours looking through this topic, talking about Sochi. I was going to really talk about Sochi. Then I started going backwards into all the Olympics, and even back in 36. And if you don't remember, 36 was held in Germany when Hitler. Now they announced that. I went back and looked it up. They announced it before Hitler took power. But even after he took power, no one sat around and said, "Wait a second, this is a giant problem." Hitler, of course, at the beginning, told everybody that there weren't going to be Jews or blacks allowed to come to the Olympics. So of course, so then he had to relent and say, "Of course they can come." And he took down the signs. Then he took all the gypsies that were living anywhere nearby, and he put them in I think they didn't call them concentration camps then, but they shipped them all out and put them in behind barbed wire fences. As everybody goes and has a great time. Meanwhile, there's this group of people, along with obviously the Jews, who are put behind, at least for this Olympic period. This is now 36. And these horrific things are starting to happen in Germany, and they still have them. Now you thought, I'm looking back in history, and I can't put my mind into the corruption that must have surrounded, Hitler, and him still going there in 36. And of course, Jesse Owens, the great hero, who wins 4 gold medals. In fact, do we have time to play this one clip before we go to a break? Yeah. I'll play it right when we come back. Let's take a quick early break here because we have so many clips to play. I've got to come back. We'll talk about Sochi, but we'll go back to the 36. We'll work our way back up. I want to talk a lot about 72. But Sochi Olympics we've got to spend some time on because it's a total disaster for Putin. His management style, even as a dictator, is terrible. He can't get anything done. This should be a world stage where it's a total disaster for Putin. I think it's becoming that. Steve Laffey's Fixing America, by the way, at LaffeyRadio.com. We're on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter. Like us on Facebook. Laffey Radio there, too. We appreciate all you do. We'll be right back. Sochi Olympics.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, Bryce. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange drip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty Five. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
I'm always up for a challenge. It's the feeling of accomplishment that drives me. And there's no better challenge than serving part-time in the Coast Guard Reserve. I protect my country, work with the best and brightest, I get great pay and benefits in return. The Coast Guard Reserve is important work. I get to serve my community, and it's always rewarding.
If you were born ready, there's a new challenge waiting for you. Learn about serving part-time at gocoastguard.com/reserve.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Where they want these types of conditions, the Winter Olympics just 2 days away. And more evidence this morning, though, that Sochi is not ready for thousands of journalists that are arriving for the games. They are appalled by the condition of their hotel rooms, many of them in shambles. And more importantly, there are new concerns about the safety of the athletes, and 2 snowboarders were injured during practice. ABC's Matt Gutman is there for us this morning. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Robin. A lot of what we talked about yesterday was construction. This road hadn't been completed until overnight. A lot here is almost finished. Check out those glistening facades of those hotels. Wait till you see what's inside.
Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Thank you for coming back. I don't know whether to go back to 1936 or continue with Sochi, but it all kind of blends together. I mean, you have a massive corruption, and we all go and watch the Olympics. After looking through this thing, I don't know if I found anything more corrupt any institution more corrupt than the International Olympic Committee. I mean, you have Avery Brundage, who was a fascist, it looks like. You have this guy who replaced him, who I knew nothing about, by the way, until I started doing this. Samaranch. Bearing Juan Antonio Samaranch. He's a guy who ran it from 1980 and for about 20 years. Total disaster. I mean, all the corruption and the professionalization of it and all the payoffs were this guy Samaranch. This thing in Sochi, I mean, you've got, I mean, I just have to go through it. We'll go back to 36 in a second. But, I mean, this is what's happening when reporters are getting there. We reported on Newsday Tuesday earlier exactly what was happening to a couple of brothers. They were supposed to build a ski jump, and I guess it came in way over. And I guess somehow they fall into disfavor because everything's overrun. Everything's full of corruption. So instead of costing 1.8 billion kronas, the ski jump was costing 8 billion. And Putin on national TV basically upbraided these people with a sarcastic remark about, great, wonderful. It went from 1.8 to 8, great job, and he walked away. And those two guys, the brothers, had fled to London. One was poisoned with mercury. So, but you would think, it's amazing. It in some ways, you look at the management style of Putin and the management style, the opposite of the President of the United States, both lead to disasters. Neither one can manage anything. One's a KGB agent who's a dictator, and he can't, after 7 years, he can't get the hotels that people are staying on to have roofs. They all have a picture of Putin in them, by the way, every hotel room. The water, if it runs, is running yellow, and they're told not to drink it. People in Sochi right now, these are the journalists, these are the athletes showing up. While they can use the toilets, they can't put toilet paper in them. What? So this is going to be the most miserable Olympics of all time, I think, as far as how people got things together. Here's some, some news that came out today about all the reporters. Some guy put an amalgamation of what reporters are seeing. Here's one. Here's the Chicago Tribune reporter. Welcome to Sochi 2014. Dystopian-like games where a simple shower poses a threat to your face. Fire alarms ring constantly and several hotels remain unfinished. Russian President Putin spent more than $50 billion on these games, the most expensive Olympics, winter or summer ever, yet he seemingly forgot to pay the water bill. He writes also, Stacy writes, as a woman, the Sochi Olympics aren't just a sporting event. They represent Putin's pride, his metaphoric muscle, flexing in an effort to show the international community just how viral his country has become under his leadership. He dared the world to admire Russia's ability to produce those games, so we must. By the way, there's a great deal happening in Ukraine today, and a lot of it is happening, I think. A lot of the opposition, the people want freedom against basically the guy who runs Russia, the guy who runs Ukraine, who's really with Russia. One of the reasons we're not seeing a lot of action over in Ukraine from Putin is that he can't really do anything right now. He's had to free some prisoners. He's trying to get good press, but this is a disaster for him. Here's a guy who, when he got to his, they couldn't find the hotel. They got to the temporary rooms. The doorknob came off in his hand. One guy writes, "Miss you, hot water in my hotel. You were great." I guess he had hot water. Another guy writes, "The reception in our hotel has no floor, but it does have this welcoming picture. And in the room, they have a picture of Putin. Every room has a picture of Putin." Got back to the hotel. The elevator is broken after a half day in use. They trekked up the stairs. The fire door is locked. You can't get in. No luggage, no clothes, no hot water, no pressure, no shower, says Brian Costa, who when he gets there. It goes on and on. All lights just went out. Some guy walking into his hotel room. Partial power outage in street lights are out. I hope they just keep publicizing this because we've got to point out, I mean, as much as these Olympics have been used from 1936 or before, I don't want to go back that far, till today, they've been used to promote, in many, many cases, statism, communism, fascism, name another ism, not capitalism, by the way. I guess, but there's definitely a bent against America having these things. But let's go back before we come back. We can go back and forth to Sochi. The thing that I was surprised about in looking back in history and thinking about the Olympics is that you can take, and we need to play this clip. We'll go back and play the 36 propaganda piece. Here's the German, here's 1936, here's how it gets reported. Listen carefully. This is all the way back to 1936 clip of being reported at 1936 Olympics about Jesse Owen. Listen to the German reporter.
The most amazing performance by America's black streak Jesse Owens in the 100 meters. The world's most superb runner makes the others look as if they're walking, as he wins the final and equals the world's record time. This and his later victory in the long jump may well be the athletic performances of the century. And now the final struggle is on in the women's javelin throwing. And here's little Sadako Yamamoto of Japan, with a name that spells trouble for commentators and a throw that just falls short of the 40-meter line. But in the end, it's the German girls who leave the rest of the world behind. Louise Krüger, and she's well over the 40 line. But the eventual winner is Tilly Fleischer, with a superb throw of 148 feet 4 3/4 inches to set a new Olympic record. So Tilly Fleischer gets a gold medal and becomes Germany's first Olympic champion of 1936.
So while he does acknowledge, the announcer, in that clip that Jesse Owens has done a great job and so forth, he just immediately goes right to a German female, was it a high jumper, I guess, and spends most time on that. And they had to report it, they moved on. But the interesting thing was, to me, and this is the Olympics that never happened. So it's 1936. And it's pretty obvious that Japan, who we love today but didn't love back then, a great ally today, and we need to be better allies. But going back, to 1936, had to be pretty obvious. Just like it had to be pretty obvious around 1934, 35, that you shouldn't have the Olympics in Germany. They awarded, and I did not know this. I just read this. They awarded the Olympics to Japan in 1936. Now, by 1937, they had to cancel them. They invaded China, and they were looking to put them in Helsinki, and then they never had them again until 1948, right? So it's one of these things where it's like, even back then, I mean, the history of the International Olympic Committee is one of, and we're not even talking about, we haven't got to Salt Lake City. We haven't talked about Munich, where they knew. They knew. We'll get into that to the next segment. That's what we'll do in the next segment. But they knew in 72. And appointing it to have China have the Olympics was all done by this guy, Samaraj, who knew what a terrible country it was and how it's been. By the way, the Olympics, so many people think, it's been in China in 2008, been a terrible thing for communist China. But so go back to 1936, and then so the 40 Olympics gets canceled. There's been no cleanup since then. I don't know if I've ever analyzed something where there's been really no change, yet it's become more popular. We as Americans or people in the world, we accept it more. We love it more than I guess ever before. And yet it still remains this absolutely corrupt situation from the top down. Before we get to the next break, let's listen to here's the announcement for Barcelona in '92. You forget where these things are, by the way. You've watched them all. I've watched them all too, and I'll watch a little bit of these tonight. Although I got to tell you, I get so sick of the pregame show. I just want to see the events. Now with the advent, I guess, of some of these other channels, maybe you can go find them. Maybe there's an NBC channel. Maybe there'll be 4 of them tonight or something. But they just don't have the events. They get the background data or where these people came from. I just want to see them run the 100-meter dash. I want to see the 440. Can someone put on now we're in the Winter Olympics now? Can someone put on the downhill skiing? I want to see where's Franz Klammer when you need him. So few minutes on TV are devoted. It's like a cultish television show by NBC who's making an awful lot of money. But here's Barcelona in '92.
De président, j'ai l'honneur de vous annoncer que le Comité international olympique, réuni en plénière à Lausanne, a attribué l'organisation des Jeux de la 25e Olympiade 1992 à la ville de... Attendez un moment. À la ville de Barcelona, Espagne.
And here's Atlanta '96. Here's the announcement for Atlanta. I love these announcements, by the way. They all clap it at the end. They play a little music. It's almost like the music portends who's going to win, by the way. Here's Atlanta.
The International Olympic Committee has awarded the 1996 Olympic Games to the city of Atlanta.
See, hear the music. It was almost like I don't know what it was, but a couple of seconds. They obviously know who's going to get it, and they play that kind of music. Here's Nagano in '98.
The city
第18回冬季オリンピック競技大会長野が開催をする栄誉を与えられました。
I mean, think of the excitement for the city too. The people who live in that city, they don't realize what a disaster it's going to be. And but I'll play one more here because we'll never get through them. Here's Sydney in 2000. The city I'd love to visit. I have to get to Sydney, Australia.
The winner is Sydney, Australia.
I mean, and the excitement of the people in Sydney and the people in Australia to get it. And then you think about it. Wait a second. These corrupt guys who run the International Olympic Committee, they've set it up so that everybody pays them off every 4 years. They plan it out. They even get the President of the United States of America to fly to wherever he went to try to get it in Chicago, by the way, Imagine that, one corrupt town trying to get the corrupt organization. Surprising they didn't win that one. But they build these venues. And especially when it goes to the Winter Olympics like Sochi today, who's ski jumping there 4 weeks from now? Who's who's going there to do this? Some of these events, maybe there's some downhill skiing people do. I don't know, but a lot of these events, people don't do a lot of these events over and over and over again every day. They just become vacant. They just sit there for years and years and years. Here's one solution, at least for the Winter Games, or especially maybe, it ought to just be in one venue. I was talking with Boss before the show. He had a great point. The Masters tournament is only in one place forever. And that's it. I mean, it's the greatest golfing tournament in the world, right? One place. Even in the British Open, they go to certain places, but maybe it's once every 5, 6 courses, something like that. Anyway, we got to take a break. We're blowing through the time here. It's Steve Laffey. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll be right back with another segment on. We're really talking about the Olympics as a corrupt organization and how it all kind of melds together, especially when it comes to Sochi and what Putin's trying to do.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place this first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined.
Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army Strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k.
What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared.
It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs.
I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma, asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
It's a huge scandal in the U.S., and some of its repercussions are being felt here. It's the Olympic bribery scandal in Salt Lake City. There are allegations the city won the Winter Games for the year 2002 by bribing some members of the International Olympic Committee. Tom Kennedy reports on the scandal and why it matters here.
The whiff of scandal permeates the 2002 Games, and the International Olympic Committee is scrambling to reassure everyone it is cleaning up its act.
Unseemly things had happened, but we never had facts. No one had the courage to say, well, here's the ledger, here's what happened. And now we do, and we can take action.
Wow. So we get to 2002. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're talking about the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee, which basically runs their own statist organization. They've risen to such a high power level that they get countries to rig it. They get money. They know all about the cost overruns that different statist governments use, even in Salt Lake City, where I think some people went to jail back in 2002. It was only because one long-serving member, what was his name here? His name was Mark Hardler. He found clear evidence that 20 of the 110 IOC members had been bribed to vote for Salt Lake City, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the bidding process was broken in Atlanta, Nagano, and Sydney. We've already played those tapes for you. I mean, here's one guy who goes, and he wrote this book, Lords of the Ring, not Lord of the Rings, Lords, the Olympic Corruption. And he's done a lot of investigative work. His name is Andrew Jennings. He wrote, the best technical bid was clearly Salt Lake City for 1998 Winter Olympics. They had everything in place. And by the way, if there's a place in America to hold it, I've been to Salt Lake City. That's the place to hold it. 50,000-seat Olympic Stadium, an Olympic Village, 4,000 athletes, and all the ski venues. And then Nagano was awarded it. And that's when they decided to pay out $3 to $7 million in favors. People, in fact, this is not that long ago. IOC Vice President Kim Un-yang was sentenced to 2.5 years in jail. It goes on and on. And then here, this guy Samaranch. This guy's one of the worst guys I've ever heard about. Juan Antonio Samaranch, leader of the IOC from 1980 to 2001, was accused by critics like Jennings of running the organization like a private kingdom, ignoring the corruption. Well, of course he ignored it. He was part of it. And the blatant commercialization of the games themselves. Of course, Samaranch, by the way, he insisted on being referred to as Your Excellency because he was part of Franco's dictatorship in Spain. So think about that. There's a guy that you have to walk up to and say, Your Excellency, not because I wouldn't call anybody Your Excellency, but let's say he was related to the Queen of England. But when he's related to Franco, Spain, as far as serving in it and referred to himself as a fascist, do you really go up and say Your Excellency? You want to spit on his face or his toes. You're not going to do it, but you're not going to deal with these people. But that's the Olympic Committee. We've got to play some more clips because we're going to run out of time. But here is, even a year ago, we moved from 2002. Here's even a year ago, the president, Jacques Roger, talking about the fact that there is no more corruption. It's a year ago right now. Getting ready for Sochi, there's no more corruption.
President, when you started as president, one of your goals was to fight against corruption. How far are you in that process at the moment?
Well, I think we've done a lot. We have intervened in many federations. As you know, we had the scandal of the judging in Salt Lake City. We had really big doubts on good judging and refereeing in boxing. There have been issues with other federations. We intervened in the level of the federations to make sure that judging and refereeing is okay. In terms of corruption and match fixing, we have established a company to monitor the Olympic Games competitions. We are working very closely with FIFA, with UEFA, but also with other federations, International Tennis Federation, on monitoring illegal betting and gambling. So I think that is already something that we are doing.
Are you sure there is no corruption in this election on Friday?
Absolutely, yes. No doubt about that.
How can you be that?
Because I believe and I trust that we have put very good measures in place.
Would you say something about how the Danish organizers are keeping up until now and what your expectations are for them to organize a good summit?
Well, so far I'm extremely happy. Of course, you can only make a judgment at the last day. That's what I'm always saying in the Olympic Games. The Games for me are finished when the last athlete has left the Olympic Village after the closing ceremony. So I will discuss with Kai Holm, I will discuss with Niels Nygaard on the last day, and I will hopefully, and I'm quite sure, going to tell them well done.
Well, he probably will just say well done. It was a great Olympics, but you turn right from that to here's an ABC's new article: alleged heroin kingpin helped Russia win Olympics for Sochi. So now they've got gangsters involved. This is one of the biggest heroin traders in the world. Craig Murray says, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, told ABC News he's one of the 4 or 5 most important people in the heroin trade in the world. His name is Rakimov. He confirmed to ABC News through a translator that he did play a role. And by the way, he says he didn't have to pay anybody any money, right? And maybe he didn't, by the way. Maybe it's like the old mafia stuff, like the movie The Mafia. Russia's businessman Gafur Rakimov. He's long been connected by law enforcement authorities to heroin trafficking. He was banned from attending the Olympic Games in Australia in 2000 because of his alleged criminal ties. But he's the guy they called upon to get the votes for Russia to get the Olympic Games. And it gets, by the way, it gets the sublime to the ridiculous when it comes to Sochi. Here's a report. Putin, and I know this is not in the mainstream press at all today, Putin says he chose the Sochi site himself. So he is a dictator. So he personally selected it. They made a big documentary about it, very reverential documentary about him selecting it, showing him skiing down the slopes. He went out here, he says, in 2001 and 2002 and said, let's start it right here. So you can only imagine what went on to get the Olympics and how much money was paid off to the members of the International Olympic Committee. But let's go, before we have another, let's take another look. Here's a clip of Sochi being the most corrupt Olympics so far. Hard to believe.
And he goes into detail in this report. It reportedly cost $8.7 billion just to build a new road and rail line connecting the Olympic events on the coast with the events in the mountains. One Russian magazine says it would have been cheaper to pave the road in caviar. None of this is exactly new. These prices and these stories and episodes have been going on for months and months. Why haven't alarms been raised sooner?
Well, the question is, how do you raise the alarm? The fact that Russia is a corrupt country, you're right, it isn't news at all. But the International Olympic Committee knew this when it awarded Russia the Olympics in 2007. So they've been kind of quietly sitting back and letting Russia go through the motions, just kind of more concerned that they actually get these stadiums and all the infrastructure built.
The Olympic Stadium supposedly ended up costing 14 times what it was budgeted for. How did that happen?
That's a good question. The company has even been investigated by the Russian authorities for raising the price with no reason. It's been embroiled in embezzlement scandals back in Moscow. I mean, this is just how business is sort of done in Russia. It's really, really hard to find a company that isn't corrupt.
Oh my gosh! So we're doing a story. We're doing a story today. It's like it's just well known that it's hard to find a company in Russia that's not corrupt. It's well known by me, by that reporter, by you. It's just well known. And yet there they are hosting the Olympics. And nobody seems to mind. No one on NBC News tonight will mind, if that's who's hosting the Olympics again. They won't mind. They won't cover that. I don't know if they'll even cover, I'm not going to watch it tonight because tonight's the opening ceremony. I just try to find like certain events that I like to watch when they actually watch them when they're having them. Because I love the athletes. You know, there's billions and billions of dollars being siphoned off into Swiss bank accounts, both from the bidding process, from the construction process. It's going to be the greatest and easiest way for Putin and his buddies to steal money out of Russia, right from the taxpayers. They just got to building a road that could be easily more cheaply built with caviar. So obviously the money's just leaving the country. And all you got to make sure in Russia is that you don't cross Putin. I wonder what will ever come out where he's a dictator. He can only take so much money with you. You know, I mean, he doesn't need any more. So it's a whole power game. It's an amazing power game by Putin. But we, as the consumer, like buying stuff made in China, we're just going to sit there and say, well, because we want to see the great athletes, we're not going to pay attention to this one part of the story, which is a major part of the story. A lot of it would be solved if they had one venue in the world, one place to have it. If the Summer Olympics were always in Athens, I'd be fine with it. Just get the facilities straight one time, keep it up, and make the Winter Olympics. If there were 4 venues, Lake Placid was one in America. I'm trying to think of where some of the great ones were, and there probably still exist. The ski jump, for example, people just so you know, they just don't build ski jumps everywhere. Right? There's not one just sitting out here in Fort Collins. People just jumping off 80 meters. Woo! How you doing? No, they just have them in certain places. So you need to have them in places where people are training for it, like out in Park City, Utah. Anyway, we'll take a quick break. Steve Laffey, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We appreciate you listening in at LaffeyRadio.com. Share it with a friend. And look at the new Fixing America Presents we just put up the other day about the budget. You'll like it. Send it around to your friends and let them watch it too, because on another topic, it's a disaster. The world is full of corruption. And it really is the people of the world, you people out there listening, versus corrupt governments. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired, family trip, sick day, starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Foreign editor for BuzzFeed, Miriam Elder, joins me now from New York. Billions and billions, Miriam, allegedly siphoned off here. Where exactly do we think all of that went?
Well, according to this new report that came out today by this opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, who has been investigating Russian corruption for years, he has found that a lot of this money seems to have been stored offshore, so we don't actually know who the end participant is. But the allegations that he makes in this report are just the kind of friends of Vladimir Putin that he's had since childhood, the officials that he surrounded himself with since he's been ruling Russia.
Just his friends. Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Just Putin's friends, his childhood friends. Imagine me calling my buddies from first grade. Hey guys, listen, we got this great idea. You know, you take over the construction company for the United States of America. You take over the building of fiber optic cables, and over there and we'll just make sure but just whip the money into a Swiss bank account or offshore, and that's what's going on. How much? It's probably got to be $20 billion. We're not talking 20 million, by the way. Just stop and think. It's like 20 billion minimum. That's got to be siphoned off. At least 10. Billions of dollars. Anyway, we're talking here, by the way, about the Olympics, the corruption that goes on in International Olympic Committee. One solution for the corruption of the building would simply be to choose one venue. They'll never do it because the International Olympic Committee, that's how they make their money. They make these cities bid, even though you never get your money back, you're going to totally lose money. I mean, maybe for Park City, Utah, or certain places where you really are going to ski all the time and it would be good to have this stuff, maybe they don't lose quite so much money. Or Salt Lake City, whatever you want to call it. But for this place, it's a total money loser. And for a country, by the way, of Russia, that relies not solely, but mostly on oil revenue, to be in a country that's dying economically. In fact, let's have a little more. How does Russia ever get its money back? Here's a little clip you should hear before we keep going.
Guys, the Winter Olympics. You wish it could just be about the fun and the games. This year, though, in Sochi, Russia, it could be a lot of different layers here, Michael, in terms of the many news stories, Russia's stance on gay rights, the real threat of terrorism. We could be looking at a lot of stuff here.
All of that, Bob, plus the fact I think in Sochi we have palm trees growing. So, you know, the whole Winter Olympics there is quite a challenge. Yeah, I wonder, both from Russia's standpoint and from NBC's standpoint, how much risk is involved? I mean, God forbid, should something happen there, what does this do in Russia? I think they've spent about $50 billion on infrastructure getting ready for the games. And NBC has spent $775 million on the broadcasting rights to the Winter Olympics. For both of these, how do you look at the risk-reward ratio, Chuck?
So let's take that in the order you put it. So Sochi spent $51 billion, I'm told, getting ready for the Winter Olympics. So unlike Summer Olympics, where if you have a track and field, you can use it for soccer, you can use it for another sport, to build a luge, to build a bobsled run, to build a ski jump, chances are it's going to get used once in a lifetime. The most expensive thing that goes into hosting an Olympics for any host city is building the facility and the infrastructure. That number is more than double what the Chinese spent at $180 billion. It's a staggering amount. Now, there are those who have alleged there's some corruption in that. Putin has obviously denied that. I think it will be, regardless of how they're able to repurpose those facilities, I think it will be virtually impossible for Sochi to make money. Montreal, host of the 76 Olympics, they spent $2.7 billion. It took them 30 years to pay back that debt. How this is ever recouped, hard to imagine.
Well, that's the only mistake the reporter makes, how it's ever recouped. It'll never be recouped. It's just gone. There's no recouping it. You didn't care about recouping it. We haven't talked about China, communist China, and the corruption around them getting the Olympics. And think about it. It was well known it's a communist country. But through obvious payoffs, and this guy we talk about, Samaranch. Remember this name, Juan Antonio Samaranch. It's a cold place in hell for this guy. The way he let this is a terrible, terrible guy. He had to know about all this corruption, all of it. He was the head of it for years. Guy who supported Franco, and the guy who replaced him, Roger, who I played you a clip of, at his burial, says, "I pledge in the name of the International Olympic Committee that we shall preserve, that perpetuate his legacy and heritage." And the writer says, "Truer words were never spoken." It's still massively corrupt. But let's get to China. I want to play you a clip about how Samaranch and China came together to get the Olympics for Samaranch, which is what he wanted, to help another statist, not fascist, but communist country before he died.
Samaranch does hold a special place in the hearts of many Chinese, as he was instrumental in bringing the country into the Olympic spotlight. Here's a look at Samaranch and his relationship with China. In many Chinese people's memories, two historic moments involving Samaranch stand out.
Are awarded to the city of Beijing.
Following Samaranch's election as IOC president, he helped China gain a newfound place in the Olympic movement. Chinese officials quickly attained important positions within the IOC, but Samaranch had another goal for China: to award a Chinese an Olympic gold. In 1984, on the first day of the LA Olympics, this came true. Chinese shooter Xu Haifeng pocketed the first gold in Chinese history, and Samaranch was the one to hang the gold around Xu's neck.
The first medal for the...
In the following years, Samaranch made great efforts to help Beijing's bid for the 2008 Olympic Games, and on July 13, 2001, he awarded the 2008 Games to China.
The result of the vote is... The games of the 29 Olympiad in 2008 are awarded to the city of Beijing.
3 days later, Samaranch finished his Olympic reign. In July 2008, the then 87-year-old Samaranch came to Beijing to witness the exceptional success of the 2008 Olympics. Samaranch once said he had love and friendship for China, and he had learned to love and respect the people. In return, his efforts to promote China within the Olympic movement have earned Samaranch the continued respect and love of many Chinese.
Of course, of many Chinese leaders, but not of the cause of freedom. And that's what I want to get at. None of this is about the cause of freedom. It's a great article written by this professor of sociology, Sun Liping. And he writes that the impact of the Beijing Olympics on China was a very deep and much more than a matter of dollars and cents. The cautious attitude of the leadership in facing such a grand event of this kind profoundly impacted China's historical path even afterwards. It marked the beginning of the ascendancy of the stability preservation regime in China. It was something that we did that we ought not have done. And he goes on to talk about that. And that's probably true. Not that that was the only thing, but that caused no change in China except more repression of their people and smiling at the outside world for the years. And they think, and so here's a guy, Samaranch, who probably knew that and wanted that. And we all lived with it to give communist China their pedestal in the world. And they built their Olympics wonderfully well. Not like Putin, who's just a guy who can't build anything. He's just a total dictator. But let's finish, because we only get so much time, with the worst moment and the implications of the worst moment in Olympic history. Go back to 72. I was telling you I was a big Mart Spitz fan. I'd love to meet the guy, by the way. He's out in California. He's done a lot of different things with his life. Married, couple of kids. But then you turn to Munich, 1972. And of course, 1936 was in Germany, right? 36 plus 36 is 72. So they're trying to have this Olympic Games. And that's when these people are murdered. The Israeli wrestling team gets murdered, 11 of them, I think. Tortured, by the way. Can't even go into the unspeakable torture that happened there. But later reports came out of Germany that they were warned, that people knew. The failure to protect the athletes, according to Weinberg, was all the more egregious because the IOC had nixed a PLO request for a Palestinian delegation to the Olympics, yet having incited the PLO, the IOC denied the Israeli government request for security for the athletes. And I could go on. We're going to run out of time. This is outrageous. But the most outrageous thing is when they're trying to have a moment of silence. And one of the sons of a murdered Israeli athlete talks about how back in 96, this is the most outrageous thing I've ever read. They're trying to have a moment of silence. They're being denied a moment of silence for the mass murder in 72. And this guy whose father was murdered and tortured says that Mr. Giladi, and I'll go quickly, Mr. Giladi was an Israeli. Mr. Giladi informed the Israelis who were invited to the Olympics in Atlanta that silence was not possible. A moment of silence was not possible because if the IOC had a moment of silence for the Israeli athletes, they would also have to do the same for the Palestinians who died at the Olympics in 72. My mother said, but no Palestinian athletes died. And Giladi responded, well, there were Palestinians who died at the 72 Olympics. I heard one of the widows say, are you equating the murder of my husband to the terrorist that killed him? Silence. And then Lana Romano, who was the wife of one of the persons killed, and she started screaming, and I can't even say what she screamed. They left him dying there for hours, dying slowly. They tortured him. That, my friends, sums up the Olympics' attitude toward freedom. Not just anti-Semitic, which is totally anti-Semitic, totally anti-Israel. But their attitude toward freedom is nil, is zero, ninguna, none. And it's still that way. The massive corruption basically promotes statism around the world, and for countries to show off their statism. And we got to go. God bless you. Enjoy the Olympics, but remember what it's really all about, from the top down. It's not about the Olympics. Enjoy the Olympics.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffy Network, LLC is prohibited.